think the best way that I used to describe how in that time what they thought of the I Ching as is the way we think of ChatGPT or Google. So it's an algorithm. You input something.
How would you use that kind of practice to help yourself heal trauma?
Well, 无为自然, this idea of non-interference, it's often translated more into non-actions.
Can you get signs from the internet? Okay, so if I'm on YouTube, like let's say like I was like, God, give me an omen, and some YouTube video pops up, would you take that as a sign, or would you only rely on signs like in the real world?
So, okay, here's the thing. You find it translated into English as either shaman or witchcraft, but really what it means is spirit medium. Like even if you're a published author, the days of the book tour where you go to each individual bookstore, those days are gone. That's not how you earn money. That's not where you get your audience. Your book tour needs to be online. A Wu is somebody who has the duty or the job within their clan to travel to the spirit realms in order to broker deals with spirits or to find out what's happening, because there's a fundamental belief that what happens in the spirit world has the effects that manifest in the physical world.
Hey y'all, welcome back to Transformation to Expansion with your host, LaJaw Bradley. Today we have a very, very, very special guest. Her name is Benebell Wen, and she is the author of I Ching, the Oracle, the Tao of Craft, and Holistic Tarot. She is also the creator and illustrator of the Spirit Keepers Tarot and is at work on an Atelia reconstruction. What is that?
Oh, yeah, it's the Taya tarot deck. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we're gonna get into that because I was like, I don't even know what that is. But please welcome her to the show. And on top of this, I would even say she is a practitioner of Chinese mysticism. And so that's why we brought her on the show today, to really kind of educate y'all from somebody who's practicing from the source, somebody who actually knows Mandarin and is practicing Chinese mysticism, to really kind of expand your perception on a lot of different aspects of mysticism, especially when it comes to, our brothers and sisters in Asia too. We're going to expand your minds on kind of the basics that we've learned in school and go beyond that today. So, please welcome to the show, Benebell Wen. Thank you so much for being on the show. Real quick, how are you doing today? How are you feeling?
Feeling really good, LaJoie. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show. And of course, I want to first start off with, what is your transformation story that got you to the point where you are today, teaching this to people online, on YouTube, to thousands of people on YouTube and on Instagram?
I think, well, in terms of the transformation story that's specific to the work that I do now online as Benebell Wen on that platform, I think it's more of not so much transformation, but being willing to peel back layers and show more of my personal practices. I think I started from a place of being very guarded, and I think I was also subconsciously taught to be guarded about your personal practices and not to really let people in, to be a little bit more lean more toward the distrustful side. And so learning to peel and unpack that and to be a little bit more vulnerable, to be more trusting of the universe, to sort of, put things out there and let faith take care of the rest. So that's been more of my transformation journey in terms of just being more confident with what it is that I'm sharing with the public.
Okay, cool. And so what was kind of your first exposure to Chinese mysticism?
I grew up with it. My mom she would never ever use the word shaman, and she would never use the word wu or upo, because in her generation, very specific to her generation and my grandmother's generation, to be called an upo, which we translate now to witch or shaman, would have been a derogatory term. And so even if you did identify as that, you didn't identify as that. You just did the thing without claiming the word, because society put such a negative onus on that word. And it really isn't until my generation of Chinese Americans, Taiwanese, like Taiwanese natives, and now that you see this more progressive reclaiming of these words. In Korea, it was the same way with the word mudang. You get back into older generations, mudang would never have referred to themselves with that term, but now there's a reclamation and pride in that term. So similar to that, I grew up with it. It actually took a while in my elementary school years to begin to discern between living and non-living people, and to know, okay, you can't talk about your interactions with the non-living in school. There's this separation of these spiritual beliefs that I never saw as spiritual beliefs. It was just so mundane and everyday. It never occurred to me that it was mysticism. It wasn't until Western conditioning that I realized, oh, this is called mysticism. And now I call it mysticism because that's the society and culture I live in. But growing up, it was extremely mundane. It was very like talismans for a test, contacting my ancestors, having to kneel before the altar if I did something bad to, pray forgiveness from my ancestors, mantra recitations, all of that was something I grew up with.
Wow. And I just, it's like so in alignment what you just said, right? 'Cause this is one thing that I think now that I've had more of a mature relationship with, I guess the spiritual aspect of myself. I've come to realize that it's something that everybody is kind of tapped into automatically, right? I talk about, telepathy is a really great example of like these supernatural powers that really everybody has experienced in one time or another, in one form or another. Okay. Whether it's with, your partner, um, or with a family member, right? Um, but it's really cool. I love how you say that though, because it's like it's mundane. It's not something. It's not supposed to be something supernatural. It really is just part of this human experience. We've been conditioned to to certain beliefs, certain programming. So we won't get into that in this episode. But but I love your experience with. I love how you say it's mundane, right? It's just part of life. And part of living like on this earth too. So real quick, just for the audience, can you explain a little bit about what Chinese mysticism is?
It's hard to generalize. So, one thing is, if you think about the size of mainland China right now, right, it is the size of all of continental Europe. And we don't say, oh, Norse shamanism is the same as, forms of Italian witchcraft or Italian shamanism. We're very clear that it's super different. There's no way you would, lump it all together. Celtic is very different from Eastern European and Russian forms of these magical traditions. And so, because China is so large, and also it was at war for so many of its dynasties, and it's actually not a monolith. You have many, many different tribes, many different ethnic groups, and each ethnic group has its own sort of traditions and magical practices. So it's really hard to generalize. But I think if you're looking at the dominant, what becomes the heteronormative culture, a lot of times it's going to be specific to your family lineage, so ancestral veneration, the spirits that your ancestors or your pillar of ancestry works with, land spirits, so the land spirits that you grew up with in your region or your village, then plus some syncretic combination of Buddhism and Taoism. You also have a lot of Wu shamanism. So Wu shamanism, even that word is hard to really pin down. You find it translated into English as either shaman or witchcraft, but really what it means is spirit medium. A Wu is somebody who has the duty or the job within their clan to travel to the spirit realms in order to broker deals with spirits or to find out what's happening, because there's a fundamental belief that what happens in the spirit world has the effects that manifest in the physical world. So there's physical problems happening in the world that you don't have a direct answer for. You go to the spirit realm to figure out what the root cause is, and that would be the Wu's job, the shaman witch's position.
I love that. So they're kind of the bridge between the two worlds.
Yes,
I love that. I
absolutely.
love it. And I just love how you broke that down too, because that is something that I guess, yeah, we kind of, I remember learning some of this, right, in American history, but this, American history or history class, at least in the United States, is kind of like, it's a hot mess. That's how I'm gonna put it. It's a hot mess.
Yes.
But yes, I do remember like a little bit about like how the Chinese invaded a lot of area. They even invaded Japan at one point, because and that's the other thing real quick I'll mention. So I lived for 5 years in Japan, so I think this is kind of my earliest introduction to Buddhism was going to like a temple. I mean, I didn't meditate at the time because I was like I think 12, but but this is kind of my connection to it. Um, and but I just love the way you explain it, and I love how you explain it's like a connection to the land. Can you explain more, or like kind of expand more about that? Because this is the first time I've heard somebody really talk about how the type of spirituality that you practice is connected to the land that you're on.
I think one of the reasons why Western scholars have always made this clear, divisive distinction in their mind between Chinese folk religion and Taoism is because, on the surface, when you look at how people are practicing Taoism in the North versus the South, East, West, wherever you go, it looks very, very different. But from our perspective, it's the same thing. Taoism is the fundamental common denominator principle. And we can talk about what those core principles are. But then if I'm in my land, how that manifests in my specific region is going to be very different from where you are, just on the basis of the climate, the land formations, whether it's mountainous, whether it's desert dry, or whether it's based on a river, it's river based or ocean based. And so your land
Right.
absolutely determines how you practice connection and harmony and alignment with the Tao. And so that's why it looks very different wherever you go. But those aren't, it's not actually different. It's just that we're venerating and respecting and acknowledging the differences in the land formations.
I love that. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, it's like I forget that a lot of like, especially when you study the Tao, right? Or even like Chinese herbalism, right? Because this was another way that I was introduced to this topic. Was through naturopathy and acupuncture. But they talk. It's so like you telling me this is making me realize. Yeah, it's so ingrained in nature. It's like one and the same. Like the way that my friend, her father was a naturopath. The way that he would study the body was very much like connected to the elements. This part, I think he would use the word like
Mhm.
damp. Correct me if I'm
Yep,
wrong, but
yep.
damp and then hot, or like it's very like yeah, I kind of didn't put that together until this moment, but I love that. I love that because I think that's one of the things that society has been really good at is disconnecting us from nature, and we forget that maybe living in the city or living in these really urban areas, how we are one and the same with nature, and that really our bodies really reflect the nature that we're surrounded by. So I love that you mentioned that. So talking about Taoism, because I know a lot of people are probably more familiar with that term and that practice, but really it's like a, I don't know, it's like a way of life, way of being. Can you just, right? It's a lot deeper, I think, that people like make it out to be. But when it comes to Taoism, one of the terms that I've come across is Wu Wei. Can you explain that a little bit for the audience?
Well, 无为自然, this idea of non-interference, it's often translated more into non-action. So I just say non-action now because it's become so standardized that if you say anything else, you have to explain yourself. But basically, non-action, a form of non-interference, go with the flow is 无为. And then 自然 is effortless living. It's this idea of letting nature take its course. It's letting the path of least resistance unfold in the way that nature intended. But it doesn't mean be idle and be lazy. I mean, you still have to work hard. It just means to follow your passions, to follow what your true nature is. So you have to know what your true nature is. So that's sort of the concept of 自然, is to follow your natural path. And so these two concepts are very much embedded into Taoist philosophy and then translated into Taoist religion or Taoist practices, because it's like, how do you interpret what that means? And then everybody will have their specific way of interpreting those terms. But Wu basically means to live and let live, is how I like to put it. It teaches you to follow your own path and to do what's natural for yourself, but also to always be mindful of your carbon footprint in a sense. Make sure, be extremely mindful that no matter what you're doing, you're not causing harm to others and you're not intentionally or unintentionally interfering and manipulating other people's paths. So it's both, and it's extremely important to think of it both. I think in the West, you often hear of 无为, non-action, non-interference, from the personal practice perspective. Like, oh, what for me, for myself, for I. You don't think of it as a social, moral obligation toward others, but there's very much a strong collectivist moral obligation to not interfere with other people's paths.
I love that. Okay, so yeah, and like, because exactly like you said, we hear about the personal applications, and yeah, like we were kind of discussing earlier, a lot of Westerners who adapt these practices, they don't teach that aspect. I can say because I've researched it, and they just talk about the personal applications, but they don't talk about how we're supposed to actually apply these daily and when we interact with people. And so you talked about knowing your path. Like, does Taoism talk about a specific way of doing that or experiencing that?
So absolutely, and this is where now I wouldn't say it gets controversial, but it really depends on your perspective. I think you're going to have a naturalist, more secular, atheistic perspective, and that's absolutely Taoism, where it's more of a spontaneous realization. You don't need to engage in all forms of ceremonial pomp and circumstance. However, ceremonial pomp and circumstance, forms of divination, is very, very Taoist as well. So you do have a strong core sect of Taoists who believe that the way to know what the true path is and to know true nature or true names is through forms of divination. And also, if you get more into ceremonial magic, there's this idea of in order to communicate or interact with spirit entities, you have to know their true name. If you don't call them by their true name, they won't listen to you, they won't acknowledge or respect you. So the first thing you have to do to prove yourself worthy as a spirit medium is to know their true name. So how do you do that? Forms of divination is one way. Knowing how to channel forms of spirit maps, the spirit map becomes a seal for the true name of a spirit entity. So it gets very, very esoteric and occult, but it can also be something as simple as just forms of meditation to understand, to clear your mind, to clear that monkey mind, as they say, so you don't hear all the noise and unlearn the social learning that you've accumulated over the decades, and to go back to sort of the baby learning, the baby knowledge, the intuitive knowledge. So there's two extremes of how you might approach how to understand what your true path is.
Yeah, and I've heard examples of both. I had one friend, yeah, she didn't do anything. She didn't go to a ceremony. She wasn't even on the path of enlightenment or the spiritual path. She was saying like one day she went to the bathroom and it just happened. Like it was just like and in her story she talks about how she saw one of her, we're not going to get deep into this, but she saw one of her like parallel universe versions of her. Okay, I don't know, we can get that if you want to, but and she's from Hong Kong, but she said that was her experience. It wasn't anything like she was meditating, it just happened, right? So I've heard of that, and it just happened when she was older too. It wasn't even something she was seeking. It was just like, now's the time. We're just going to put you to get to do this work that you need to do now, because this is the time to do it. You lived your little life being a career woman. Like now we're going to get to the work you're here to do.
I think one of the things that we learned growing up is the legends, mythologies, and stories of the 8 immortals. And the concept, very simply, is that there's 8 immortals, but all 8 of them achieve immortality in very, very different ways. So you have the extreme of they like dedicated the entire lifetime to alchemy and study and meditation and ascetic practices. And this other guy, he fell out of a tree. A peach hit his head, and then he achieved enlightenment. Like, you know what I'm saying? So, and because you grow up with those stories, you know, and you appreciate, and and you honor the fact that everybody has extremely different paths to enlightenment and transcendence.
It's really cool, and I think that's one of the things that that I teach a lot too, is that people don't realize that, they try to go the same way that everybody else is doing. And I was like, no, you want to take the path less followed, because you're going to get there a little bit quicker. Okay. So, because a lot of people, they have their dreams, they have their aspirations, they have their passions, but I think sometimes they think that they have to, they have to pursue those passions the way that everybody else is doing it. And I'm really saying, don't do that, because then there's a long line. Like, you're going to be standing in line, right? Because everybody's trying to take the same path. So I love that you said that. And then I was gonna say, like, my other friend, she's doing she does Kundalini yoga, but she's devoted. She's just like, I'm gonna do. I know there's a routine for 5 years. I got to commit to the routine, and I'm gonna get there. And that's how she's gonna get there. Like, it's okay. There's no bad or good way of doing it. Just recognizing that I think everybody has their own individual path. And even though she's doing that path, she's still traveling. She's still exploring life, right? She's still living her best life. But every day when she wakes up and when she, before she goes to bed, she does her practice, because she's like devoted to it. But and it's so funny that you said that the guy, I mean, I don't know many Chinese stories, and again, Chinese again is a very broad term, right? A lot of these stories I feel like come from different parts and different traditions and cultures within China, because I know that's, again, another topic for another conversation, but I know there's so many different cultures. I mean, it's a huge country, and it's so funny too, because there's parts of China that we don't even hear about as Westerners, until we look at a map and we're like, whoa, it's like, it's gigantic. This is like a huge country. But anyway, the guy who fell out of the tree. Right. Okay. So that's one thing I want to just point out real quick. So yes, the guy, he fell out of the tree, or the apple hit his head, and then he got enlightened. That sounds a little painful. Is that necessary? Like, I don't know. Like,
Well, you could be the ninth immortal and find your own way to get, maybe it's not, you don't have to get hit by a. See, that's the thing, again, with legends. I think some stories say that he was hit with the fruit, the peach, and then others say there was no hitting. But
okay.
you know what? Falling out of a tree still hurts or something like that. And another, okay, no, that's not true. There's another telling where like the tree was actually Shi Wangmu, the goddess of the goddess of the West. And so when he fell, the branches came and like saved him. And then once he was saved by the tree, he achieved. Stories are so unreliable. It really is like a game of telephone. It depends on who's telling the legend. But yeah, basically, the point is not whether he fell off a tree or not, but it's like there's many different paths to enlightenment, including falling off a tree and possibly being saved by a goddess.
Right, exactly. Right, but I'm sure
So
he
it's
felt
not
some.
painful at all.
Yeah. But I'm sure he felt some panic, like as he was falling, like, how am I going to survive this? And then the universe just comes, helps him out. And that's the other thing too.
That's true.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the other thing too. Is like people. I've heard so many stories where it's like if you ask for help, you're gonna receive it. Okay, especially these kind of dire situations. Uh, but yeah, so okay, so one of the reasons why I know you is I Ching. This is like kind of the way I kind of found out about you through YouTube, through Instagram, is that you had a more deeper understanding of I Ching, whereas like some of the blogs I was going to was like, okay, you can do it in 1, 2, 3 steps, and I was like, I want to learn a little bit more. I need to, if I'm going to learn this, I want to, I want to learn it. And so, what got you into I Ching? Did you always do the practice, or?
My dad, I grew up seeing my father study the I Ching as a philosophical text, and I saw my mother consult the I Ching for fortune telling. And so there was that sort of binary. And the reason for, I mean, I think it's because my mom tends to be more of a folk practitioner. She grew up in the rural south of Taiwan. It's considered the heartland of Taoist mysticism. My father has a doctorate degree in engineering, polymer sciences. He has multiple patents. So he's definitely your typical contemporary science minded, if there's no empirical evidence, it's bust type of guy, right?
Mhm.
And even somebody who is empirical evidence or bust kind of guy will still go into the I Ching to like self reflect or to deep dive into his own ruminations and thoughts. So if he is facing a challenge, I see him go into this text, do the calculation method, and use that whatever source, whatever message comes out to sort of ponder, and it becomes more of a prompt for self reflection that he then arrives at the answer. Whereas my mom was like, "Oh no, there's a spirit talking to me. I invoke a spirit. The spirit through the I Ching speaks to me, and that's what the answer is." So it's very different perspectives, but both use the I Ching to understand or calculate an answer. And so I grew up with that in the third grade. I got my own copy of the I Ching. On the left side was the classical Chinese, on the right side was the English. And I just took notes in there and studied it. And then because the I Ching is considered one of the texts in ancient China that you had to master in order to pass the imperial exams. At some point, as like a Chinese Taiwanese person, I felt like it was almost a rite of passage for me to translate and interpret and write my own commentaries on the I Ching. You could choose one of the five books, right? There's five classics, and of the five, I chose I Ching. So it's always been a part of my life in that sense.
That's awesome. Yeah, and you have a book. I think it was released this year or last year.
Get started on your wellness journey today. Whether you are starting your wellness journey in the middle of it or finishing it, this library will help you so much to jumpstart your wellness. And really, it has so much more than that. It has full guides on how to quantum leap, full guides on how to manifest, and even my personal favorite, coloring books. Yes, and I'm talking unique coloring books. Y'all already know what we're dealing with, okay? We have baobab coloring books, cactus plant coloring books, and so much more. And it's completely free. So please make sure to check it out, especially if you're on your wellness journey, or if you know a friend who is on the wellness journey and wants some free resources, please let them know about the wellness library, okay? The link is in the show notes below. I love y'all so much. Let's get back to the show.
Yes. Last year, I don't have a copy in front of me to show, unfortunately.
It's all good. Definitely check it out though. If you guys are listening and you're interested in I Ching, please check it out. It's good because again, a lot of the texts that I guess, were given to me or that I've come across, it's Western written, and they don't, it's written by Westerners who don't even know Mandarin. So you're getting a translated copy or a translated book by somebody who knows both English and Mandarin fluently. And I think that's going to really allow like for a more accurate explanation of that text. You said, sorry, you said so much. So what are the 5 texts? You said there's 5 major texts. What are they?
Book of Documents, which is on history, Book of Rights, Book of Rights is like on etiquette. It's like Civ Pro, or like, you know, that civil government class that we took in high school. It's kind of like that, learning the rights and rituals of governance. Book of Poetry, Book of Songs, which is a book of
Oh,
poems. So
wow.
there's like these 5 classics, and then they're just considered the 5 pillars of what, you know, a well-rounded academic or scholar needs to know. And of those 5, you know, one is poetry, right? Literature, rhetoric, politics, political theory, governments, and then of course there's divination. But that's difficult to say because divination doesn't mean what we necessarily mean today. I think the best way that I use to describe how in that time what they thought of the I Ching as is the way we think of ChatGPT or Google. So it's an algorithm. You input something, there's a whole code, there's a whole algorithm. Just because we don't understand it, we just see the visual on the outside. But behind the scenes, there are engineers and programmers who are writing the code to be able to do an output of an answer to your input of a question. So basically, the I Ching was an ancient form of ChatGPT or Google because it is based on a binary code, based on a triplicity, based on the hexagrams. The whole thing is mathematically sound. That's why you see the same system and architecture in, for example, DNA and RNA. Our DNA and RNA is based on the same system and structure. AI, all of computing systems and artificial intelligence is based on the same idea of the binary code. So it's just a really interesting way of looking at it. Divination doesn't necessarily mean like woo, you know, it's just a form of calculation and computing.
Yeah, oh, I love how you broke that down. I love it, I love it, I love it. Yeah, I mean, this is again, like we were talking about before the show. This is why I feel like this is so in alignment because this is something that again I've been teaching too. It's like it's nothing new. This is the biggest thing I emphasize. It's nothing new. It's part of our design. People don't understand that this is part of our design, right? Um, yeah, I don't want to. Yeah, if you want to know more about that, you guys can look at other videos. You can look at Benebell's videos, but we ain't gonna get too deep into it. But one thing I want to note though is this is something I've seen a lot too. So you said that your parents, right? So your father was more into the logical part of the Tao of I Ching, and your mother was more of the like kind of intuitive part. Um, and it's so is that a thing? I see this a lot in relationships, right? It's like the woman will always be like, no, you can just feel, no, I love mysticism. I love, it's like it's more like intuitive, and then the guy's like, no, I want facts. You need to prove this to me. Is this like part of that duality between like male and female, or?
You know, I wonder if it's more socialized. Like I think,
Mhm.
you know, I think sometimes I wonder if it's socialized. Like for men, it's not as socially okay for them to show emotions or to lean into intuition. So their first impulse is not to lean into intuition, or even if they have an intuitive hit, their impulse is for this to be socially acceptable, for me to be socially acceptable, I better go and search for empirical evidence before I go around running my mouth on my intuition. Whereas I think maybe women don't necessarily sometimes have that same stigma. And so they're more open to leaning into, they'll run their mouth on their first intuitive hit. But then because of that, I think women are not socially pressured to learn more about science. I don't think women are less capable in the science and mathematics. I think because the reason there are less women in science is because we weren't socially conditioned to be, more competent in those fields. When we condition women, when we train women to be good in those fields, they excel. And now you see a lot more women in science and math and computers, right? So it really depends on the intentional training and conditioning of our society. I think that's just my hypothesis.
No, thank you for sharing. Yeah, yeah. And I see where you're coming from. And I feel like I agree too, because it's like, yeah, against that conditioning. And we've seen that too. We've seen in society, we're seeing that flip now, right? We're seeing that flip where there's more women who are trained logically, they think more logical, right? And then even my friends who are very more logical thinking, they oftentimes have partners who are more, even if it's a male, right? They're more in tune with their feelings, right? Whereas my friend who happens to be a woman, she's just not, but it still has that balance, right? My question is, how did Taoism spread outside of Taiwan then?
Oh, to be no, I would definitely you would have to say it started from the Yellow River civilization. So it's like the whole history of Taoism is it's like a big hot mess.
Okay.
But I would say it started in the Yellow River civilization. It began with the congregation of various Wu shamanistic cultures that sprang up around the Yellow River and Yangtze River civilizations, which is definitely northeast of the mainland and
Oh,
that whole area. And then during the Han Dynasty, which is still in the mainland of China, you started to see it becoming more institutionalized. The reason I sort of informally called Tainan in Taiwan the heartland of Taoism now to Taoist mysticism now is because of communism and the Cultural Revolution.
right.
So after the Qing dynasty fell, and then you had communism and called the Cultural Revolution, they shut down a lot of the mysticism. They were completely wiped out a lot. There was book burnings. There was the sort of the persecution of anybody who self-identified as a Taoist priest or shaman. And so it kind of collapsed and deteriorated in terms of cultural knowledge in mainland China as a direct result of very modern Chinese history, which is the Cultural Revolution and communism. But then in Taiwan, it was outside of the influences and the clutches of communism.
Mm.
So it prospered. So, for example, Singapore, Taoist mysticism is extremely robust and beautifully vibrant in Singapore, Malaysia. Malaysia tends to be more into Islam, but you do still see a lot of this being practiced. And also, Buddhist mysticism in Southeast Asia is extremely vibrant. Whereas what you see in Southeast Asia in terms of Buddhist mysticism and esoteric Buddhist practices used to exist in mainland China, but as a direct result of the revolution, all of that kind of collapsed in mainland China, and now you see it more vibrant in other parts of Asia.
Yeah, in the recent history, I've heard a little bit at least about China doing this where they any mystical practices, it seems like they really fear it and they fear it so much that they're trying to eradicate it wherever they try to invade. But anyway, we won't get into that. But you mentioned Buddhism, right? So a lot of people who are kind of at least Westerners, a lot of Westerners who are introduced to Eastern religion typically, I mean, I can't give a number, typically it's Buddhism, right? A lot of people, especially now, people are talking about mindfulness and meditation. So people think of Buddhism, that's the first thing to think of. But it's a very surface level perception and kind of information about Buddhism. And one of the things that I learned when I traveled to Thailand to study meditation, not necessarily Buddhism, because Buddhism in Thailand is very different. That's the other thing you'll learn. Every country, that's the other thing. People think Buddhism is it's all the same, but it's like, no, there's different types of Buddhism too. Like, it's really crazy. So you go to one country, Buddhism is practiced very differently than another country. Okay.
Yeah.
It's really crazy. So anyway, like the robes, the different colored robes, they're different colors for a reason. Like it really is a different practice. But my point is, when I went to Thailand, this was the first time where I was introduced to, not even introduced to, where I had observed Buddhist monks practicing some sort of divination. And now I will say this, I'm very observant. So I think everybody who goes to Thailand doesn't necessarily pick up on this, but I'm just very perceptive. And so one of the things that I kind of stuck out to me, because I remember somebody went to one of the head monks for help with something, and he was like rolling dice, and I was like, whoa, that's mysticism stuff. Wait, what's going on? I thought we were just meditating. So can we go more in a deeper dive on Buddhism and kind of let's go a little bit past the surface and kind of why that is, like, why a lot of Westerners, we don't really see or hear about that deeper aspect of Buddhism.
So I think a large part of it is for many, many decades, even centuries, arguably, the Buddhist principles or parts of Buddhism that gets exported into the West, of course, is going to be the parts of Buddhism that Westerners are most comfortable with, that is in alignment with pre-existing Western philosophy and Western ideologies. So anything that does not fit within the construct of Western ideology, they've already discarded and they keep in Asia, and they only export what makes sense to them, which is why I think you often get the Buddhism is a philosophy, which it absolutely is, but then you've kind of like separated out and left behind all of the other aspects to Buddhism. And so I think that's one aspect to it, because I don't think natives in Asia have this same concept of, oh, Buddhism is just meditation and philosophy of life, or because they have that vibrant practice of they see the divinities. But then even that is very, very nuanced. So we may look like we are venerating Buddhas as gods and goddesses, but inside our hearts, we know that's not what we're doing. We absolutely understand it's energy. Anybody can become a Buddha. Buddha mindset, Buddhahood is something that anybody can achieve. When you're venerating, because we bow to our parents, we even bow to our enemies before a competition. And so it's this idea of just understanding your humble, like it's being like it's showing your humility and showing that you know less so that you can become full and know more. And so there's this idea, so we don't necessarily venerate Buddhas, but anyway, yes, there's this whole vibrant practice of mysticism as well. So I think what people in the West don't see necessarily are forms of magical practices. Tantric Buddhism, I think, is the only thing closest to esoteric Buddhism you have seen in the West, which comes out of Tibet, and it's Tantric Buddhism through the Tibetan lens. There's also forms of Buddhist mysticism from Asia that incorporates talismans, that incorporates forms of divination. It approaches the I Ching through a Buddhist lens, whereas Taoists will approach I Ching through a Taoist lens. And so, yeah, there's this whole other practice that's very much into the magical realm and believing in magical spirits and whatnot. Even demons, the fact that Buddhists believe in multiple levels of hell, which means there are certain types of Buddhist practitioners designated with the job or the occupational role of traveling to those astral realms to negotiate, placate, and work with those demons and spirits and whatnot.
Yeah. Oh my God. I love how you explain that. Okay. So, yeah, you say so much. Like I have like all these questions. I love it.
I'm getting chatty. I'm sorry. I am very verbose.
No. No, I love it. I love it because I just have too many questions. It's more on me. Yeah, everything that you're saying is just like I can, I'm just affirming in my mind from what I've observed too. It's like, Tibet, yeah, you said Tibetan Buddhism, they're very much they talk a lot about those different realms. Whereas if I talk to a Zen Buddhist, they're going to be like, they're not, well, again, I guess depending on where the Zen Buddhist is coming from, how much they know. But the ones that I've talked to, they don't even mention that. They're just like, meditate, mindfulness, and I think even some of the best Zen Buddhists that I've met in the States, they don't really talk about that but I like how you put it though. It's not necessarily different religions or different practices, it's different roles. I just love how you put that. I love that perspective. And it just makes sense in my mind too. Because it's like everybody has their own role to play. Everybody has their own part to play to help, bridge, again, what we were saying earlier, bridge between this reality and the other realms within this construct. Again, for those of y'all listening, just listen. I know there's some people who are like, what are they talking about? Just listen. But it's really important to note that because that's one of the things and one of the misconceptions I had when I went to Thailand. I was like, when I went to Thailand, the Buddhism I saw was no longer a philosophy. For me, it looked like a religion. But one of the things one of my friends who was from Chinese, who practiced Chinese mysticism, she was explaining to me, she's like, when I bow, I'm not bowing to something outside of me, I'm bowing to myself. And it wasn't because she doesn't see this, there's no separation, right? There's no separation between you and the Buddha and so in my opinion, this also gets you closer to God because there's no separation with God. God it's one, right? It's everything. Yeah. And so I just love how you kind of broke that down. And that's something else because there's a lot of people who are like, I'm not going to bow to nobody. But it's like when you really tap into the truth, it's like it's not that you're bowing to somebody else or you're
It's not submission, right? It's a very like the bow in our culture is not the same as the Western idea of bending the knee. I think that's the problem. When
Mm,
they see Asians bow to statues, they're like, "Oh, are you bending the knee to an inanimate like statue of gold?" Like, no, maybe like that's your biblical culture. You know, you're doing that. We're not doing that. We're doing something very different. And what your friend said is absolutely one mindset, which is the idea of when you see the statue of the Buddha, you're reminded it's a reminder of your potential of the inner Buddhahood inside of you. So when you bow or venerate, it's like, oh, I'm venerating the potential of who I can be. It's my higher self. It's absolutely that. So it's just a totally different mindset and interpretation of the bow. It's not bending the knee or submission. It's the idea of reverence.
hmm Right. Yeah, yeah. And I just, yeah, I love that. I love that we talked about this because again, people get that very confused a lot. And it's so funny because I lived for about 5 years and then 2 years after, but I'm a military brat. So I lived for about 5 years in Japan. And so I was used to bowing because I mean, we moved there, during middle school and high school. So, you nod your head. It's for us, it wasn't a big deal because when you live there, it's just part of the culture. It's nothing, it's not like you said, it's not bending the knee or whatever. It's not that. It's just part of the culture. This isn't, you know? So I was very used to it. But then when we came back to the States, and I just learned more about just mysticism and spirituality. People were like, "No, you can't bow to anybody. Don't do it." But I was like, "It's not." Yeah, again, like you said, it's not the same. I don't want to say the meaning. Yeah, it's not the same meaning though. So yeah. So thank you for explaining that. And so real quick, so let's talk about Buddhism and then Taoism. Is it one and the same? Does one come from the other one? What's the relationship between the two?
Well, they're definitely different and distinct. Buddhism was imported into China,
Okay.
but I think because a lot of it innately aligned already with a lot of core Taoist principles, it syncretized and just melded into China really, really easily because of the synchronicity between a lot of the principles and the resonance between Buddhism and Taoism. And then you do have Taoists who will say things like Buddhism is just a form of Taoism because of their definition of the Tao. Their definition of the Tao is so broad strokes and universal that they're like, oh, Buddhism and Shinto, these are just aspects of the Tao. It's a different tradition of the Tao, but that's like a very specific point of view. It's not everybody's point of view. Because they are different religions. And I do think even how they talk about what transcendence means, so in Buddhism, of course, is the idea of nirvana. And then what does nirvana mean actually differs between different sects of Buddhism. And then even esoteric Buddhism versus esoteric Buddhism, exoteric and esoteric Buddhism will have different ideas on how to achieve nirvana. And then in Taoism, it's this idea of immortality. So, in place of nirvana, the great goal, the ultimate goal of all of these practices that you're doing or falling out of a tree, right, is to achieve immortality. But what does immortality mean? And that's also a great place for colorful debate and discussion.
Right, right, right. Right. Yeah, we won't get into it today. I feel like we've been here forever.
There's a fighting word.
Yeah, I think
Instead
one
of
day
picking
maybe I'll
both
have like a
sides.
panel and we'll talk about this. Because that's the other thing that I learned too. There's oh my god, the interpretations of like the afterlife. It's like I don't even want to say it's not different interpretations. I just think there's different levels to it. There's different levels. It's like surface and the depth,
Mhm.
right? There's surface levels to understanding it. Yes, there is a heaven. Yes, there's a heaven. People want to be like, no, there's no heaven. There is a heaven, right? But it's deeper than that, right? You can go above and beyond if you want, or if you're cool with just learning. Like in this lifetime, you'd be like, oh yeah, I just want to know what heaven is. Okay, heaven, great. Then that's fine. It's totally okay. I feel like not everybody's meant to know all of that stuff.
For example, Chinese Mahayana Buddhism, when you say heaven, they believe that there are practices you can do or mantra recitations. If you repeat mantra recitations enough times, your afterlife can be in a place they call Western Pure Land. The Western Pure Land is basically a form of their heaven. It's a heaven that is created by the Amitabha Buddha. So it's a heaven that one of the Buddhas created, but it's not heaven as in a permanent afterlife the way you think of biblical heaven. It's like think of another galaxy or another world. So I can be reborn here on Earth, or because of my karma, I can get reborn into a paradise, a place that's a lot better than Earth, but it's still a form of living, and I have a finite number of years in that world, and depending on my karma in that world, get reborn again. And that's also very Buddhist, but it's not the type of Buddhism you necessarily hear about in the West. Okay, sorry, that was the end of my interjection.
No, thank you. No, thank you for explaining. Yeah, because I was like, should we go there? I guess we can go there. We can go there. It's fine. Okay, so one of the things that I came across in Thailand was they had one place. I went to two different temples. One temple was more like meditate, read a book, like it was, and then like there was another temple where it was like this is the library, but there's no books. Like so, it was just like like very very different. But the first temple that I went to, they had some books on on the different realms and stuff, and like yeah, I guess basically kind of taking some of these higher concepts and kind of putting it into the 3D. And even from seeing some of those pictures, I still don't understand how it works. Like I was like, I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, I guess yeah, we're not gonna go in there because I just don't. I mean, if you know more about the different realms, do you want to talk about that real quick? I don't know that much about them, but
There's a lot of different, okay, so there's different interpretations of the different realms depending on the type of Buddhism, but there is also a similar concept in Taoism that I can probably speak to. So, for
okay.
example, the majority of Taoist belief systems is that there's nine sectors on Earth. That's what they believe. So there's nine, at that time, China was divided into nine provinces. So that's where they got it. And so it was this idea, well, if we divided China, which is the whole universe, right? The whole world was
Mhm,
just China. They were the
mhm,
Middle Kingdom. They didn't know about the other places back then. So that realm was subdivided into nine. And so they were like, well, because as above, so below, therefore heaven, there's nine heavens, and then there's nine underworlds as well. So that's one example of one belief system where because at the time there were nine provinces, they said there's nine heavens and there's nine underworlds, and then that just kind of stuck. And so even as we expanded our knowledge of the world, we still continue to keep that idea of nine heavens and nine hells or nine underworlds. And then you do have the idea in Buddhism as well. There's either nine or there's 10 levels of hell, and then you're reborn into different levels of hell depending on your karma and what you did. And we have one bodhisattva, 地藏王菩萨, Earth Store Bodhisattva is how or they are interpreted, because as a human, the Buddha, the Bodhisattva, was female. And then when they became a Bodhisattva, they chose to become a Bodhisattva in the form in the male form, just like Kuan Yin was male as human and chose, once enlightened, to take a female form as a Bodhisattva. So it's flip flop, but the same idea. There's a Bodhisattva who chose as his bodhisattva's vow to go to hell and save hell beings and basically try to get hell beings to reincarnate back onto earth or even higher, and he refuses to reincarnate to become enlightened until the last demon has become enlightened. So he will be the last of all of us to become enlightened.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's a noble cause right there. Come on now. I want to applaud.
Yeah, I know, right?
Because I was like, how would you transform people from hell?
Yeah,
That anyway, we ain't gonna get into it. But I mean, I'm sure that where there's a will, there's a way. But that's
or your bodhisattva, right?
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, this is basically their job. For those of you who don't know, bodhisattvas are basically people who, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's people who have attained nirvana, but they choose to come back to this realm in order to help other people reach nirvana. That's
Yes,
basically
exactly.
it. But I didn't know they have one for the demons too. That's
Yeah.
that's news to me. um, that is so cool. Okay, so anyway, I mean, we can talk about it for a long time, but I want to talk about, so one of the things that you do specifically in the work that you do is kind of bridging I Ching with tarot, with cardology, and I wanted to kind of talk about this a little bit too, because one of the things I'm seeing, I'm learning numerology, cardology, astrology, all of it. I'm like, it's all the same. It's all the same, just painted with like a different tool, right? Like one's with a paintbrush, one's with a crayon, like I mean, whatever, however you want to put it. But what kind of called you to make that bridge to kind of talk about the two?
Well, I think because when I was younger, the leaning toward the occult and leaning toward connections and communing with the spirit realm has always been innate within me. That has always been my path. But because I grew up in suburban New York and I went through identity issues, as many Asian Americans did, one of the things I did for a long time was not want to openly practice my indigenous traditions and to but then because I didn't practice the indigenous traditions that were really in my nature, there was a hole. It left a big gaping hole inside of me. And so what filled that hole as a, junior high kid and high school kid was forms of Western occultism. So, the tarot, learning more about Rosicrucianism, learning more about the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, all of that became more what I was interested in. I mean, it's all like kind of the same as you say, and so because I was interested in that occult, Solomon magic and all of that was just something that I leaned into in my younger years. And then it's sort of as I develop as an occultist, being able to unpack that and get back to my core nature, which of course is going to be more indigenous traditions. But when you practice all of that, there's something really similar to it. You do see a resonance. They may look different on the surface, but if you deep dive down into the core essence of how these tools operate, there's something very similar to it. And every single occultist, East or West or whatnot, they tap into and see that universality. That's why you have so many tarot experts talk about how, Rachel Pollack talked about the I Ching being, tarot's Chinese sister. Aleister Crowley and a lot of these Western, Eliphas Levi as well, was really interested in forms of Taoist mysticism and the I Ching because they saw the resonance with their Western practices. And then now in China, you see a lot of Chinese occultists interested in the Kabbalah because there's a lot of resonance between Kabbalistic principles and traditions and Taoist traditions and principles. So it's just something that I think at the core essence, when you peel it all back, it's driven by the same something.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's like that the underlying the root, and it's all rooted in the same place. So is that why so you do both because you traditionally you went to tarot, but then you're like, okay, wait, no, this is I Ching. Let me lean towards this a little bit. Was there something that happened that empowered you to really lean towards more of the indigenous teachings that you do now?
It was always part of what I did. I think maybe the turning point or catalyst was when I wrote my second book, The Tao of Craft. So that book started off as me wanting to write down and document in writing all of my grandmother's practices. My grandmother never wrote anything down. It was 100% an oral tradition. And I found that, anytime I needed to know something, it had to be like one by one phone calls to like my mom or my grandmother or, or an auntie. And I was like, well, wait, why don't I write all of this down so I can give it to my children? I ended up not having children, but at the time, that's what I wanted to do. So I wrote this whole book with the intention of it being something I transmit to my kids. But then I decided to publish it. So I stripped out all of the more family oriented stuff and found ways to make it more generic and suitable for Western consumption. So I changed the book entirely to make it suitable for Western consumption, but that was where it came from. And then as I did that, a lot of Asian Americans reached out to me and was like, "Well, I lost touch with my language. I can't speak Mandarin anymore." And so a lot of these texts are inaccessible to me. My own parents became Christianized, or they really chose to sort of shut down that side of their of their understanding because there is a huge distrust between occultist practitioners in Asia and the lay or the sort of civilians. So occult practitioners, there's a deep
Yeah.
distrust. They will not talk about their practices with non-occult practitioners because there is that divide and distrust of those who are the civilians. And so they feel that they have no way of accessing this traditional cultural knowledge. And so that kind of became my sort of self appointed mission to create a fountain and to put that fountain out there so that those who wanted to access that fountain of knowledge will have access to it.
Oh, beautiful. I love that. So it seems like you helped a lot of people with that book then.
I hope so.
Well, yeah, no, I think so. I can feel it because it's like a lot of people who lost touch with that indigenous knowledge and like you said, they don't necessarily know Mandarin, so it's good to have that. Like I don't know, I feel like it's you acting as a bridge between the two worlds, like without even really working with people one on one, right? just through the book itself. That's really incredible.
I know today's guest has you filled with questions, but don't worry. You're going to have a chance to sit in this seat on August 15th, 2024 at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to have our first live Q&A where you get to ask the questions to a previous guest. Make sure to click on the notification bell, subscribe to the YouTube channel so y'all can be the first to know, because it's going to be first come, first serve. Okay? I'll see y'all there. Peace.
Well, do you teach I Ching? I guess you do on YouTube, but do you do like classes or courses on I Ching?
In person, no. Sometimes for like, the conferences, I'll do it at conferences or events, and people invite me to certain types of events. I'll go ahead and put on a workshop or seminar on the I Ching, and I'll teach it. So I've definitely done that. I do have a full-blown day job, so I'm still working full-time as a corporate attorney, and so that takes up actually most of my time. Therefore, at this moment, it's very hard for me to find the time to mentor in person, but that is on my to-do list when I retire. So after I retire, that is something I want to do more full-time, is to mentor and to teach one-on-one. But at this time, the easiest way for me, and even not just for me, I think the society we live in today, the reality that we live in now, is that things make more sense online. And the sooner people accept that this is the new reality, the better everybody, especially content creators, authors, and artists, are going to be. Like, even if you're a published author, the days of the book tour where you go to each individual bookstore, those days are gone. That's not how you earn money. That's not where you get your audience. Your book tour needs to be online, and that's how you gain exposure, visibility, and the audience. And a lot of authors haven't wrapped their mind around that yet. And this is funny coming from somebody who is such a Luddite with terrible technology. But like, so like, like, rich for me to talk, but like, yeah, at least I understand and acknowledge that, we do live in a new reality.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, this is the Aquarian age for my astrologers out there. And people don't realize, but right now, I don't know the exact placement, but I think Pluto is having a huge influence on this, meaning that Pluto is a very powerful planet, meaning that it's like this. There's no it's literally, it's going like this. And it's going like this with technology for sure. Yes, this is like so important. And one of the things the book tours, now it's all online. Like you said, it's all on podcasts. Podcasts are now the new book tours. This is something I've observed like in the past like 2 years, 3 years, is that people they don't go to libraries, they go to podcasts now. It's like, it's really insane. It's not insane, but this is the times we live in. But yeah, so people, that's how people kind of, or people are missing that part, right? They know the technology is going to come up, but they don't realize that it's like human beings are also getting that upgrade too. And so I wanted to kind of talk to you about, when it comes to the I Ching, do people use the I Ching for predictive, like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's many ways to approach the I Ching, just like there are many ways to approach the tarot, as I think in modern day practices of tarot we now see. You still need to pay homage to the fact that there is this tradition of using the tarot, using the I Ching and the tarot as forms of fortune telling or divination. A lot of people who practice forms of ceremonial magic in Eastern or Western traditions are also going to see these objects as forms of ritual tools, as sacred tools that can be empowered by some kind of spirit sentience, and that you use the tool, you operate this tool to essentially communicate with the spirit realm. So that's absolutely an aspect of it. But then you also have this long, many dynasty history of using the I Ching as being able to expound on various schools of thought. The reason I Ching isn't categorized under Confucianism, it is not categorized under Taoism or any other specific school of thought or religion that came out of Asia, is because so many of them claim the I Ching. They all claim the I Ching within their as an influence over their school of thought, because there's something universal in the I Ching. And so I think when you use that calculation method, there's something about that meditative practice that does something inside your own mind. And I don't know the science of neurology to know what it is, but we're beginning to understand it, right, with our understanding of the various forms of hormones. But something happens in your brain, a transcendent or change in consciousness, and then there's an output of something, and then that thing that comes out is able to prompt your mind to unpack aspects of your subconscious or even unconscious, raise it to the surface of your conscious knowledge, and then it appears as if you know something beyond your ability to know. So it appears as an extraordinary knowledge, but it's not. It's something you've always known deep within. But somehow this tool and the way you've operated it is able to unpack and float to the surface that thing that has always been deep within. That's how I see the I Ching, as something that unpacks something deep within and takes it to the surface.
I love that. Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna be honest. Like my my interaction with I Ching is very much like Q&A. Should I do this? Is this the right direction? But I love the way you kind of you're not interpreting it, but you're using it, and you're saying it's deep. It can go deeper than that. You can actually. I mean, from what I've gathered, is like you can use it to actually kind of dig deep into trauma if you know the subconscious is hiding anything. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? About how would you use I Ching to kind of tap into the subconscious a little bit more if something's hiding there?
I think it depends on what you want to unpack. It's just like different forms of illness, right? Like how I cure the common cold versus how I cure a chronic illness or something that's genetic or like a terminating or debilitating disease is very different. And so you can't treat the common cold and cancer with the same form of curing method. And so that's kind of how I see all forms of magical practice, the I Ching as well, any of this. And so if what you're trying to treat is the common cold, then you can be a little bit more fun and light with it. But if you're trying to treat something that is more, it's already really like dug into your roots, a form of trauma has already like bled everywhere. And it's like to unpack that without knowing what you're cutting it out of is extremely dangerous. You need to be an open heart, you have to be a surgeon and know exactly what you're doing if you're going to unpack trauma, because you can't just pull it out. If you just pull it out, what else are you hurting that's perfectly healthy in the process? So it's very, very similar. And so I want to tread carefully when you talk about using forms of mysticism to unpack and heal trauma. It absolutely is, especially for so many decades and centuries of Indigenous history when we didn't have the tools or vocabulary for mental health. Shamanism, forms of witchcraft and magic, and faith healing were our ways of handling mental health issues. And if you think about it, a lot of the times when we talk about demons, people have demons or children have demons in their soul retrieval. In modern day sensitivities, you can unpack that as forms of psychology. Even when you observe how shamans, a very seasoned, sophisticated, educated shaman, how they approach treating forms of spiritual illness and exorcising demons, how they tread is very, very similar to how a psychotherapist treads with a patient or with a client. And so there is something very, very similar to that. It's just a different methodology of psychological healing or therapy. So I do see it as therapy. And just like therapy, like I can't be your therapist. I'm not licensed. Like you wouldn't go to, like, you have to know who you're going to and whether or not they have the specialized knowledge to be treating your trauma. You don't just go to any hack. So it's very, very similar. Like if you're going to go to a shaman to unpack something, make sure you're going to the right shaman. That's all I want to say on that topic.
Yes. No, I completely agree. Yes, because like this is one of the things that through my own experience, um you have to do your research, and I guess one of the things that I always recommend, but this isn't foolproof, but I always try to go to somebody who's a lot older than me, somebody who has been doing the work for a longer time. Again, it's not foolproof, but you do bypass a lot of the younger people who aren't really, might not be doing their practice for the right reasons, or they're still growing in some way, right? um and this is one of the other reasons why I have so much respect for monks too, because they have kind of let go of a lot of the like human indulgences, And so for me, I think that takes a lot of mental willpower, that takes a lot of control over your body. Whereas like I've met shamans that don't have that control. And so again, my personal opinion, I wouldn't really, go for that, but to each their own, right? But the point is like, do your research if you're going to go for that kind of help. And I also want to mention this too. One of the shamans that I met in Mexico, he was telling me about that, how he would get people or, family or friends, I don't know how to put this, family members would bring one of their family members who were having some kind of psychological breakdowns, or they were having what is the word? Not psychotics. Oh, schizophrenic. That's what it was. So he had one patient who happened to be schizophrenic. One of their, I think, family members brought them to him. And like he said, he tread very carefully. He was like, okay, we're going to do this. And he explained, what the process was going to be. And it actually cured their schizophrenia, which was incredible. And so I love how you said that. It's like everybody does this in different ways. Like, yes, you can take this person and go to a therapist or even go to another shaman, but it might not work, right? So there's an element of kind of knowing who you're working with, knowing, and also there's in my opinion, but there's an ethnic element too. This is one of the other things that I found is that, it really helps to work with somebody who has a similar or the same lineage as you in terms of like ancestry. Again, some people might be special. You might not need this, right? But I had another friend who he did like all of these ayahuasca ceremonies, and it wasn't, and he happens to be German, but it wasn't until he went with a shaman who he wasn't German, but he was from the Netherlands, but he still had the same the same ancestry. It wasn't until he went to him that change that he intended, through all of those other ceremonies actually happens, right? But I love that. It's different ways of doing the same thing, getting to the same kind of result of healing that trauma. And I love how you also put, you can't just rip it out, right? Like that's a no-no. I mean, if you do rip it out, yeah, like you said, it's a very painful process, but there's a way to do it where it's soft and you can kind of ask the root of the problem to now leave your body. I guess that's an eloquent way of putting it.
This farm isn't just any farm. It grows for Juice Plus. Juice Plus is farm-to-capsule nutrition made from 30 different non-GMO fruits, vegetables, and berries. Harvested at peak goodness to make nutrient-rich plant powders in convenient capsules. Clinically proven for over 20 years to support your wellness. It makes it easy to help bridge the gap between what you should eat and do eat. Fruits and vegetables are always on the table with Juice Plus. Juice Plus. Goodness is our natural state.
Or dissolving it. Another way, psycho-spiritually dissolving it, knowing exactly where it is, and you have to kind of assess holistically exactly where it has all the like sort of tendrils has reached, and then find a way to slowly and safely dissolve it. And so then once it dissolves, it does leave a hole, and then finding ways to heal it and to repair the part of the spirit that was kind of carved out because of that ingrown toxicity. So that's one way that I think spiritualists and mediums approach it.
Yeah. Okay. And so, so when it comes to healing trauma, and the thing that came up for me was the Wu-Wei. Is that how you say it? Wu-Wei? Okay. I just want to make sure I'm saying it right. Wu-Wei is like the law of like non-attachment, right? How would that tie in with healing trauma? How would you use that kind of practice to help yourself heal trauma?
So one thing that I see a lot of spirit mediums do when they approach this type of work that in modern days we call mental health work, when you start getting to highly specific, specialized chronic illnesses that we then communicate or translate as, a demon possession or a demon influence, the first thing is to not deny it and I think in modern day therapy, they talk about living in the reality of the patient. And I don't love the way that that's phrased because it's almost presuming that they're not living in a real reality and to like indulge them in their fake reality. But that's not what the spirit medium does. So the spirit medium begins very much with the idea that this is real. It's real and they acknowledge what's happening to the individual. I think if you don't acknowledge the depth of the pervasiveness of the trauma, then you can't fully heal the depth of it. And I think one of the mistakes I personally observe a lot in the West is that they don't acknowledge the trauma. And so one way to approach that and the nature of things is to begin by acknowledging the depth of the trauma and in a way like leaning into it. And then from there, finding pathways to slowly having it want to get out itself. And so there's this idea of how do you approach trauma in a way that has the trauma itself as an independent, sentient being want to leave the body. And so then there's different practices for that, but that's one way they approach it with the concept of Wu Wei as a principle, is to convince and cajole the personified trauma to leave the body.
I love how you put that. You know what's funny? What came up as you were talking about empowering that the entity, or if you know, acknowledging that it is a living thing, it is within our body to leave. What came up was the one. The bodhisattva of the underworld. I feel like this might be a practice where you might call on him, you know, like a little bit.
There is.
Yeah.
It absolutely is, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's really beautiful, but I love that perspective of like, yeah, and I think this is what therapists do, right? This is one of the things that I think therapists they learn to do, is like, you have to acknowledge that what the person is going through is, you know, is legitimate. It's like part of the practice. It takes a lot of patience. That's why I'm not a therapist, because like it takes a lot of patience. But it's basically what therapists do also, and I think a lot of therapists too are also, not a lot, but you know, some of them are also spiritual healers, right? Because that's what it is. Whenever it's something mental, it's like it's something, well, not even just mental, it's something going on with the heart, right? And our heart is kind of like in a deep bond with our soul, right? I think if there's something going on with our soul, it's going to be connected. We're going to feel it in our heart. That's kind of our attachment. I mean, I guess everybody has a different opinion, but this is just my interpretation. And so by having that acknowledgement, there is something going on. I think you're right. It does help that thing that might be within that person, that dis-ease that a lot of people, that many people have. It helps that dis-ease being like, oh, you know, they notice that I'm here, you know, and it kind of helps that to kind of like get released out of the body. So thank you for explaining that too. I wasn't too sure. So thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much for your explanation. Cause even I couldn't answer that question. So, but yeah, so just connecting that with the process of non-attachment, right? And again, I think it links back to what you were saying earlier. You can't force something out. You got to kind of, you know, let it want to leave on its own. Or like you said, I think you said like, yes, that's what you said. I was going to be like, disapparate. I was like, that's not a word. That's not.
One of the things I really like and appreciate about the vocabulary of demon possession and exorcism, why I think that framework works so well, is if you are suffering from some kind of mental imbalance or some emotional issue, when you concept and using mundane terms to explain it, right? So if you don't believe in the woo, but you want mundane terms to explain what exactly is happening, why does it work so well? It's, I think, because when, let's say I'm dealing with something, right? And if I conceptualize it as a demon that is influencing and possessing me, and now I have to find a way to oust that demon, by personifying it, I actually emotionally detach from it, because now it's a separate entity that just happens to be occupying space within me that I can then expound and take out. But if it's something that's embedded into me, then it becomes my identity. And so if I treat my illness as my identity, that has to be as part of my ego, it's a lot harder to unpack. And so a form of detachment, a form of emotional detachment, begins by seeing it as a separate entity. And then it's much easier to detach from a demon than detaching from a part of something I claim as part of my body or my spirit or my identity. And so I think that's one way that the vocabulary of demonic possession really works in these types of spaces.
Yeah, that makes sense. And actually, it's funny because one of the techniques a lot of therapists use is like they tell you to assign a name. So like, especially if there's certain experiences or feelings that you, or not even feelings, thoughts, right? People are like, oh, you know, they think negatively about themselves. A lot of therapists, they say, okay, give that voice that's thinking negatively about you a name. Okay. So it's like, okay, Karen, like, I don't have time for this right now, you know, like, but it works. It works because again, it's separating you from not just the thought, but the pattern, right? The cycle that you might have been looped in before. So thank you so much for explaining that. Okay, lastly, I want to talk about. Ooh, where are we? Okay, I wanted to, real quick. I wanted to talk about the I Ching and soulmates and relationships. Can you use the I Ching for that? Do people typically use that for relationships?
Yeah. In fact, what's so funny is there's so many hexagrams that are like the way it's written or the way it has historically for many, many centuries been used in terms of interpretation is for love and relationships. So you have a lot of hexagrams that over the years, fortune tellers have said this hexagram means, love, the love will prevail. And this hexagram means the love will not prevail. And so it absolutely is something people use for love readings. Because if you think about fortune telling, human condition is human condition, no matter what part of the world you're from. At the end of the day, what do you care about as a layperson? Love, relationships, your career, and your health. And so basically, every single form of divination in every culture has a way of addressing these very mundane issues. So absolutely, I Ching is used for love and relationship readings.
Yeah, I was just curious because and again, because people, they use other methods, they use astrology, numerology, what's like another one? Yeah. So they use so many of that, but I was just wondering if you can also use that for each.
One of my, like, I laugh at it, haha. One of my favorite lines that's actually a line from the I Ching that you can get as a divinatory reading is a withering poplar blooms again. So it's a withering poplar tree blooms again. And how it's been interpreted is an old lady finds new love. Like an old widow or an old hag finds new love. So again, because that's how it's been interpreted, it shows that it's historically and culturally used in love readings.
I love that. Okay. Yeah. And again, I love that. I love the connection between the nature and then the human being and the experiences of the human being. I love that. I love that. So when it comes to, living in your purpose and finding your purpose, is there, does I Ching or even Taoism, is there a way to find it? Is it using the law, the Wu Wei wisdom, and just like, I don't know, I guess just going with the flow? Is that the answer to that for people who are looking for their purpose? Like, what would you say in terms of like using the Tao or I Ching to find your purpose?
Everyone has different paths, so it's hard to say that one way fits all. I think that's sort of the difficult part of the answer is you have to find your own way. And yes, absolutely, the I Ching is this idea of using it as a tool to communicate with heaven. So if you have a question for heaven, then you can ask that question through the I Ching and it will reveal the answer. In fact, the legacy, the whole history of the I Ching, how it was born, how it came to be, was the king, the shamanic king who developed the system, received the mandate of heaven through the I Ching divination system. And so there's this idea baked into the I Ching that it helps divine who has the mandate of heaven. And many of the line texts in the I Ching itself talks about the mandate of heaven, who has the mandate and who doesn't, which in modern day, like you and me terms, who are never going to be emperor per se, it's more about like, oh, will you find your higher purpose? Like, so like instead of being emperor, it's, are you going to find your higher purpose? What is your higher purpose? What is the reason you were put on this earth? I think also a lot of us believe in astrology and how as above, so below. So there's this idea that forms of natal astrology help to reveal an understanding of your truer purpose. So those are ways that I would recommend going about finding that information.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for explaining that. And I love that. I love what you just said. Right, we're no longer emperors, but I feel like it's more that like we are emperors, like you said, of ourselves, of our lives, of our reality, right? This is like where we're at right now in terms of human history. We are the ones who can determine and create our own realities, our own universes. If you want to live in a castle, you can live in a castle. Like, it's like, this is truly like where we're at right now. So thank you so much for that explanation. And of course, last but certainly not least, I ask all my guests this, how do you see yourself expanding from here?
I don't know that I see myself expanding as I see myself having been assigned a task. So I do feel that there was a task assigned to me, and I am fulfilling my homework. I'm doing the task, which is to build this font, to build something, a wellspring of some sort to put out there, access for others. And so that's all I'm doing. I'm just taking the notes. I'm taking notes, taking cues, listening to the signs and omens one step at a time. And not necessarily planning too far ahead. So whatever, I have faith that the signs and omens tell me what my next step needs to be, and I just follow and listen to the next step. And then when I'm done building what I was assigned to build, peace out, I'm done. So there's no expansion, I'm out. Bye.
Right. That's fun. I love how you explain it, 'cause I feel like it's very Wu-Wei. Like, it's like, this is where I'm at now, and I'm gonna go with the flow. I'm gonna take the signs. And maybe think of, okay, just one last question. Can you get signs from the internet? Okay, so if I'm on YouTube, like, let's say, like, I was like, God, give me an omen, and some YouTube video pops up. Would you take that as a sign, or would you only rely on signs like in the real world?
Yeah, I would have. So, okay, here's the thing. Yes and no. Yes, I would take anything and everything as a sign. Anything can be a sign, including things on the internet. I don't make that bias or prejudice distinction between, to separate everything up. No, I don't see that. Anything and everything that is within your realm can be a sign, 100%. However, remember, Wu-Wei is also about not being able to unpack manipulation and interference. And so the problem with taking cues from the internet is because of a lot of those algorithms, how they're picking up on your own what you're doing and then feeding back what they think you want. And so it's almost like you think that Google is psychic because it gives me the advertisements that I want. So I'm like, oh my God, you're psychic. But no, there's something there's something more at play. And so because there's that interference and manipulation, you can't necessarily take it as signs from God. You know what I mean? Because there
Right.
is that human artificial interference. If you are able to unpack the human interference and all that artificiality, then the divine signs and omens come from everywhere, including the internet. The problem is that interference aspect. So it's yes and no, right?
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I mean, what you basically saying, what came up from was like discernment, just using discernment, especially online, right?
Mhm.
Especially online. Okay, thank you so much for that. I had to ask that real quick. But thank you so much, Benno, for being on the show. And real quick, Benno has been super, super generous today. She is giving for the first 20 people who contact her. Okay, the code will be in the description below. You have to contact her with the podcast code, and she'll send you guys via your email access to her genetic memory through tarot course for free. Okay, that's only for the first 20 people. And as usual, if you listen to this in the future, you never know. Okay, so make sure to click on the link in the description below and check out the work of Benebell Wen. Do you have anything else to say, Benebell, before we sign off today?
I had a fantastic time with you, Lishwa. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, this was wonderful. We definitely need to have you on the show again. This was incredible. It was a really, really great episode. And yeah, I can't wait for you to be back on the show. Okay. I love y'all so much, and I will see y'all next week. Peace.